Welcome to our journey of transformation. We're in the fifth stage of our journey, studying the parables, conversations, and principles of Jesus that help us understand how to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Our life in Christ continues to be transformed as we learn to love as our Heavenly Father loves, with love that is unconditional. Now we're going to be looking at one of the principles of Jesus found in the Sermon on the Mount about judging others. And the reading comes from Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, and then verse 12. So let's start with Matthew 7, verse 1. Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Then in verse 12, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." Does anyone really enjoy being judged? It's doubtful. When our neighbors make assumptions about us, we feel cheated and frustrated. When they place us in a category, we feel like we are suffocating. When they condemn us without giving us a chance, we feel defeated and angry. And when they speak the truth about our shortcomings, it is even less pleasant. The feeling of failure and guilt are not easy to bear. Then why? Why are we so quick to judge in the very same way that they judge us, without paying attention to the inconsistency of what we're doing? Perhaps we learned in our childhoods that the best way to defend ourselves is to accuse someone else. "It wasn't me, it was my brother." It's a quick and easy defense. We begin to practice it so early and so often that it becomes an impulsive reaction. Even before anyone judges us, we are already preparing reasons why we are smarter, more powerful, and do not commit the kinds of mistakes others do. Jesus wanted his followers to conquer this habit of impulsively and unfairly judging, because it prohibits us from loving our neighbors as ourselves. If we love ourselves with a healthy love, we surely do not want to submit ourselves to the pain of unjust criticism. Then to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, we ought not to judge them in these same hurtful, harmful ways. Jesus surprised his first audience in a similar way that his words still surprise us when we first read them. He said, "Do not judge." We think, what does he mean? Don't we have to judge? It is true, we do have to judge. The New Testament was originally written in Greek, and the common Greek word that is translated judge means to separate. The idea of this word in its most basic sense means to separate or divide things, distinguishing one thing from another. We must separate good apples from bad apples, right conduct from wrong conduct, and truth from falsehood. We have to make these decisions for the good of our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. A parent needs to judge the behavior of a child. A supervisor judges the work of an employee. And a disciple of Jesus must even judge the behavior of a fellow disciple to warn him or her about destructive behavior and offer guidance about how to change it. Then what did Jesus mean? The problem is, we carry the meaning of this word too far and use it for the wrong reasons. Reading more of what Jesus said helps us understand his meaning more clearly. He said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Jesus wants us to stop and think about how we judge. How far do we judge people? What is the standard we use when we measure people? What are our motives for judging people? These questions are powerful because they not only help us examine our judgment of others, but also reveal what we can expect when they judge us. We take judging too far when we move away from simply distinguishing between right and wrong and instead make assumptions about people, put them in categories, classify them, and finally, at its extreme, condemn them and claim that they are incapable of good. Parents commit this mistake by moving away from simply identifying and explaining why some behavior was mistaken and not stopping before they have called their child stupid or bad. Jesus is saying that if we do not want people to put us into categories or claim we are beyond repair, then we ought not to judge in this manner. Furthermore, when we measure something, we must use an accepted standard. For example, when we measure someone's height, we can choose either feet and inches or meters and centimeters. We have standard rulers that have marks on them to indicate how long an inch or a centimeter is. So imagine that using the accepted standard for how long feet and inches should be, we measure the height of a friend to be 6 feet. And imagine that we are jealous of that person's height because we are only 5 feet 4 inches tall. We might create our own ruler with inches that are twice as long as a normal inches. Now using our own ruler, we measure the person's height, and they suddenly turn out to be 3 feet high. Jesus was teaching us that we ought not to judge in this way because with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. By using this invented ruler, we are actually giving permission for people to measure us using the same ruler. We would turn out to be 2 feet 8 inches tall. This is the problem a parent faces when he judges a child using some created standard of perfection. Would the parent want to be judged using a similar standard of perfection? Would a supervisor who rides around all day in an air-conditioned truck inspecting workers to see how hard they are working want to be judged by the same harsh measure of hard work he uses to measure his workers? When we make judgments, there are also emotions and attitudes that accompany those judgments. Jesus also wants us to stop and examine our hearts before we judge. When certain attitudes color our judgments, we are giving permission for people to judge us in the same way. If, for example, we are critical of others, focusing on the negative aspects of their behavior, we invite people to judge us with the same negativity. With such a critical frame of judgment, it would be better for us not to judge, unless we actually enjoy people looking at us with the same critical eye. If we do not have sufficient respect for people and tend to make assumptions about their behavior or form prejudices about their character without knowing them, we can expect people to make assumptions about us. Pride is another attitude that severely inhibits our ability to judge. This destructive disposition promotes, among other tendencies, the habit of trying to appear superior to others. Pride is like a blanket that covers insecurity and self-criticism. In the passage we are considering, Jesus describes a person who offered to remove a speck of dust from his neighbor's eye, while he himself had a huge stick of wood in his own eye. This helpful person represents us when we try to correct the behavior of someone else without the willingness to examine and judge our own behavior first. Jesus said that we must first remove the huge stick of wood in our own eye, and then we'll be able to help the neighbor with the speck of dust in his eye. Pride keeps us from even noticing the piece of wood stuck in our own eye. It results in hypocritical judgment, and we thus invite people to judge us in the same way. If pride colors our judgment, it would be better for us not to judge. Jesus told the hypocritical religious leaders at the temple in Jerusalem, "Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." John 7, verse 24. These leaders had serious difficulties finding reasons to judge Jesus as evil, but their jealousy motivated them to keep looking. The best they could do was to judge and condemn him for working on the Sabbath by healing on that day. Long before Jesus came, God had given the people of Israel a command not to work but to rest on the seventh day of the week. But in what sense was healing work? First of all, work represents effort that expends a substantial degree of energy. When Jesus healed, however, he did not have to jump up and down and scream and wave his hands all around. He simply pronounced the word, and people were healed. Once he applied a bit of mud to someone's eyes. But was this work? Work is also activity that produces something. Healing certainly produced a result, but the result was so valuable, like blind eyes that could suddenly see, that its value was far greater than the rest one might enjoy from doing nothing on the Sabbath. In fact, the religious leaders understood this reasoning because they circumcised male infants on the Sabbath, believing circumcision was so important. But was not healing even more valuable than circumcision? The leaders were judging based on appearances, without considering the deeper meaning. Would they want to be judged by the same measure they were using to judge? Would they want to be judged by people who did not question the assumptions they were making? The superficial reasons they gave for judging were not the real motives for their judgment. The problem was with their hearts. They were envious of Jesus' wisdom, power, and popularity among the common people. They simply wanted to find something seriously wrong with him to condemn him and be rid of him. With this malicious attitude filling their hearts, it would be better for them not to judge. Jesus told them, judge correctly. They ought to be fair and just in the way they judged. We know there are times when we must judge by distinguishing between right and wrong, counseling people to make wise decisions and helping them to avoid truly destructive behavior. How then must we judge in these necessary moments? What is right judgment? The answer is becoming clear. We simply need to think carefully about how we would like people to judge us. We must be certain to judge others the way we want to be judged. This is precisely the teaching of Jesus. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus concludes a series of teachings, including his warnings about judging others, by saying, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you." Matthew 7:12. Judge in the way you would like people to judge you. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. If, for instance, we have committed an error, we would like people to judge us with mercy, forgiveness, and relief from the guilt we feel, without making us suffer more by piling on criticism and condemnation. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote, "Judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment." James 2, verse 13. Judgment can wound us, but mercy will always heal us. If we must be judged, we would also like people to judge us with compassion. Compassion moved the Samaritan to help the injured Jew without judging him. He could have easily made the assumption that the Jew should not have been traveling alone on that dangerous road between Jerusalem and Jericho. He should not have been carrying so much money, or have been dressed in clothes that people would want to steal. Instead of seeing mistakes to judge, the Samaritan saw the relief he could offer and the wounds he could heal. When we make mistakes, the person who comes to know us and seeks to understand why we fell into temptation and then gently, wisely gives us counsel to avoid it in the future is the person we know loves us with the same love the Samaritan offered to the Jew. Right judgment also requires the humility to look deeply into our own hearts, to realize there are thoughts and behaviors that we need to correct. When we judge with humility, we are transparent with people, letting them know that we also struggle, sometimes with the same issues they struggle with. We would like people to judge us with humility, so naturally, we humble ourselves, taking the pieces of wood out of our own eyes before we offer to assist someone else with the dust in their eyes. Considering how we would like to be judged, we can also add patience, forgiveness, gentleness, kindness, as well as unconditional love, which itself includes all of these other characteristics. Remember, the love we practice when we love our neighbors as we love ourselves is unconditional love. Unconditional love means loving our neighbors even when they do not deserve to be loved, showing mercy even when we, in our own calculations, believe that they do not deserve mercy. This degree of love implies that there may be moments when, because of love, we decide not to judge. They have judged themselves already. They are suffering and do not need to suffer more. We instead give them the mercy of forgiveness and the hope of another chance. Once, when the religious leaders brought a woman to Jesus who had committed adultery, they wanted to know how he would judge her in John chapter 8, verse 3 through 11. But he was able to turn their judgment inward on themselves, so that they had to examine themselves first and see the huge pieces of wood protruding from their own eyes. As a result, instead of judging her, they left, one by one, without a word, until Jesus stood alone with the woman. "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" he asked her. "No one, sir," she replied. Then Jesus told her, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." This is how Jesus loved his neighbor. And what shall we do if we judge, and we judge with mercy and compassion and humility in our hearts, but the person whom we must judge becomes angry and lashes out at us, judging us severely without reason? Should we then change our approach and judge them with equal severity? The answer is no. We cannot sacrifice the principle of Jesus, do to others what you would have them do to you. Practicing this principle, we will continue, without wavering, to judge with mercy, compassion, and humility in our hearts, because this is who we want to be. Now let's think about the qualities of love that are manifested through this principle. First of all, as we've already mentioned, there's humility. Humility is to lower ourselves by, for example, admitting our mistakes, serving the needs of others first, and recognizing, like a child, one's smallness and weakness, dependence on others, and the need to learn. What does this principle teach us about the practice of humility? We admit our own mistakes, correct them, and maintain a healthy perspective about our own weaknesses before helping others deal with their mistakes. There's integrity. Integrity is a quality of love. It is to be the same person no matter whom we are with or where we are, to be transparent, sincere, and honest. And what do we learn here about integrity? An aspect of integrity is consistency in who we are and how we think and act. Integrity also means to judge without the hypocrisy of doing the very same things we are condemning in others. Mercy. Mercy is to relieve another person's suffering without thinking about whether they deserve relief. And what do we see about mercy through the study of this principle, about judging? When we must judge, our desire should be to heal and not to cause suffering, not to cause more suffering. So we choose to use words that can encourage, lift up, and give hope, even when we think people might deserve severity. And compassion, to feel the suffering of another person deeply enough to want to relieve their suffering. We judge with compassion. People who make mistakes, behave in offensive ways, or judge others harshly, these kinds of people are often suffering confusion, discouragement, and negativity. We want to relieve their suffering, not add to it. So we ask questions to know how we can help. And gentleness. Gentleness is to treat others with tenderness instead of severity, not wanting to cause harm. What does the principle teach about the practice of gentleness? If we would want others to correct us with tenderness and care, not severity, we ought to correct others with the same gentleness. There's unconditional love, of course, is to care for the welfare of another person without expecting anything in return or thinking about whether the person deserves our care. How do we judge with unconditional love? Even if the person reacts negatively to our counsel and correction, we will continue to show patience and gentleness, compassion and respect. And then respect. Respect is to recognize the value of each person and to treat him or her with care, honoring their value. Judging with respect means to refuse to make assumptions or to allow prejudices to control our judgments and this is a way of honoring the value of others by refusing to allow these assumptions and prejudices to color how we judge. So now, it's our turn to go and do the same. Now first, examine yourself. Are you genuinely humble in your judgments? What are the slivers of wood in your eye that you must remove first? Describe in detail how you would like people to judge you. How willing are you to correct and judge people in precisely the same way? And what can you do to avoid judging people based on assumptions or prejudices without knowing their hearts? So as you judge with love, compassion, kindness, gentleness, respect, integrity, may God bless you.